Hi, this is Kathi Quinn with Floriani. Floriani is a division of R&K Distributing, and I want to welcome you to this week's Project of the Week. Well, last week we were talking about preferences, and we're going to go ahead and finish looking at the preferences this week. Sometimes we don't realize all the preferences we have, or we may not understand the functions that are under those preferences. So we're going to go ahead and go to Tools, Preferences. Now, last week we looked at the formats. We're going to go to Environment this week. Now, the first thing you see is inches. Inches are metric. Now, we can do that here in the preferences very easily, but sometimes in a design, we want to change back and forth. I'm not going to go Tools, Preferences, and come in here to change that. All I would do is I would right mouse click on my toolbar, go to metric, right mouse click and go to inches. So actually this is a faster way. But again, we can tell it, these are the rules of the house and I want you to work in inches. Now we have Autosave. This is a great feature. I'm sure you're familiar with it in Word and several other Windows programs. If I'm working on a design, this is automatically going to save every 5 minutes in case something goes wrong. The computer shuts down, the power runs out, whatever can happen. Now, my rule of thumb, though, is if I'm working on a design and I've gotten a particularly difficult part done, or I've really been working hard on getting something lined up, everything, I will automatically go File, Save As, and I will try and save along the way. But sometimes we get wrapped up in what we're doing and all of a sudden the computer goes dead. Something happens. So this way we don't lose all of our work. We just lose back to the last 5 minutes save. Now the next one is the image editing program. Microsoft Paint is the default. Why? Because every Windows computer, it's part of Windows. Windows, when it installs in your computer, has Microsoft Paint. So everybody's got it, so that's the default. Now, if you were working with another program, let's say you work in Adobe Illustrator, you work in Corel Draw, you're good. I'm happy with Microsoft Paint because I don't have to know a whole lot and it works just fine. And what does that mean? Let's look at this. I'm going to come into my wizard and I'm going to say that I want to change a JPEG into artwork. Now let's look at the JPEG first real quick. If I bring in this little worm, and I use him all the time because he does what I want him to do wrong, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. To know this is a JPEG, if I come in here, do you see how the color starts blurring in between the two greens? Well, I got a little bit vicious on that one. But you can see that the colors start blurring, and the bigger you get, the farther apart those colors go, and the more little squares you have. So if I go to Auto, turn this into artwork, because we always want to work with clean artwork. We want to work with vector files. And vector files aren't little squares of color. I'm going to come to my wizard. I'm going to go ahead and select that same image. And I'm going to go to Next. Now we would have our finished size here. Now it looks really good. It says I see 4 colors. So I'm going to say, great, go ahead and turn this into artwork. But when I go to Next, I want you to notice it lost the differentiation between the two greens. Because once those pixels started going out, it blurred so much, it didn't really pick up the difference then. So let's go back. I could go to Edit Image, and that's going to take me into Microsoft Paint. So here I can grab a bucket. I can grab a high contrast color and come in here and give that such a contrast that it's not going to have a problem with the two colors. Then I would simply save it, and I can go ahead and exit. Now when I exit, you notice it comes right back in here to my program, and now when I finish this off, I have a clear, clean differentiation between the two colors. And now you'll see the difference is we have nice, clean color. We don't have any more of the squares. So that's what that is talking about. So let's go ahead and go back into Preferences. Now, the next thing we're going to look at is language. Well, I'm going to say most people listening to me speak are speaking English. But if you prefer to work in Portuguese, Spanish, or Czech, here you are. You can change the language of your program. Now, these boxes, these warnings, we have the choice of putting on or off. Now, the first one is show warning for large satins. That means if I resize a design or I digitize a satin that's over 8 millimeters wide, the program's going to warn me, you know what, this satin, you don't want to make it wider than this, because if you've got one that's 10 or 12 millimeters wide, it's telling you this is not going to work well. So it's a warning to you to make those satin stitches into a fill, change them somehow so they'll stitch out better. The next one is show navigator in startup, and a lot of people don't even know what the navigator is. So let's look at that. I'm going to go to tools, and I'm going to go to view. There we go, view, and I'm going to tell it I want the navigator up. Now this is a little window that is showing me my screen. Now let's bring a design in, just anything. So what the navigator allows me to do is pan around a design very, very easily. So if I've got a big design and I want to pan around it, this helps me see where I am in relation to the design, because you can see on screen, I can't see the Y anymore. So I can pan around and I've got an idea where I am here in relation to the entire design. So that's what the navigator window is. Let's go back to Tools and Preferences. Next one is automatically select created paths. Now that's a good one. I have no idea what that means. So that will be an answer. I will answer that question next week, because I will have to ask DJ. So there you go. So now we have one on this page that I cannot answer. Now the next one is show drop-down menus on hover. So I'm going to put that on, and that means if I hover here, it's going to show my whole drop-down menu. Anytime I have a little arrow, instead of having to left mouse click on the arrow, when I hover, all my options are going to come up. So anytime you find an arrow, go ahead and you can hover. Now there's nothing going to come down from a line, because I don't have anything selected. So let's select these items. So now I'll see my align portion here because I'm hovering. So that's what automatically hover is. Let's go ahead and go back to Tools and Preferences. So that has finished this page, except for automatically select created paths. And I will find that out for you on next week. Now, view. Last week we talked about view. We talked about the highlight selection. Now, I didn't show you the crosshair in input mode. So let's look at that. This is what the crosshair is in input mode. So if I'm going to create something, let me go ahead and pick up stitch here. Notice I've got a crosshair that shows my points. Some people love to digitize with this, and I'm sure a lot of very good digitizers do. I find for me, this crosshair, it makes the screen too busy for me. So I right click and that's finished. So that is one preference that I never turn on because I'm not comfortable with it. And I didn't show you last week, but I did mention it. So that is what that means, show selection crosshairs. I talked about lock properties in your view library window, show tooltip in input mode. That's when it's telling me, for instance, oh, I thought I turned that off. Just a minute. Let me turn that off because that'll make me crazy. Let's turn that off. Input mode. Where did I? There it is. Okay. I don't know. No, it's not going to go off because my computer's been acting strange. Let's see one more time if I can get this to turn off. Oh, I forgot to push OK. Never mind. I blame my computer and it's operator error. If I deselect this, I'm going to have to tell it OK. So it will deselect it. So now it's not there. Now this is tooltip. I've got this and it's showing me the length. So you see the tooltip in that box, whereas you didn't see it when I was doing this one because I didn't have that selected. This is really helpful if when you're digitizing, if you need to know, I need this to be 3 inches long. This makes it very, very easy to do that. So it's a wonderful thing to have turned on when you're digitizing. Let's go back to view. So that's what our show tooltip in input mode. Show backdrops below grid. Well, that's so that when I have a grid up, let's go back to our first worm here, our original. If I want to turn on the grid, you notice he's underneath the grid. The grid is on top of him. And that's really nice a lot of times too when you're digitizing over a picture, drawing over the top of a picture to be able to see your grid. That's a lot of time that is a real help. So that's a good feature, but sometimes you don't want to see the grid. You could flat turn it off all completely, or of course in your tools and preferences, you could tell it to be underneath the artwork. So it would obliterate the grid where the artwork is. So that's what that's talking about. Everything else I think we've already talked about. Let's go ahead and we're going to skip digitizing. We'll talk about it later. We're going to go to grid. The spacing on your grid, I've set this 1/4 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch right now. Now over here it says horizontally, now you notice this one's gray. I can make my grid any color I want. Then I can do a major grid every so many lines. So if this is at 1/4 of an inch, I would have every 10 lines, so every 1.5 inches, what is it? No, 2.5 inches, I would have a line at 1/4 of an inch. That's what this one, let me turn on my grid. That's what these are. That's what these purple lines are. So there's a major line and a minor line, which is your actual grid size here that we're working with. Let's go back to tools and preferences. Now, we don't have this. If I right mouse click on the toolbar, I don't have this. I can't change the colors of the grids, but I can certainly by right mouse clicking go to grid settings and set this. Also, we have how we want to see our grid. Do I want to see it as solid lines, dashed lines, or dots? Of course, that's all personal preference, and sometimes the smaller you get, you might want solid lines because it's easier to see this 1/4 of an inch smaller line if I'm not, because a lot of times, how do I explain this? When you're doing something that, let's zoom out, let's go to say 50%. If these are dotted lines, they're not so easy to see the 1/4 of an inch. So sometimes smaller ones, solid lines, work better. But again, those things are personal preference, what your eyes like. So you've got those options. I show them as dashed lines most of the time. Snap to grid means it'll snap. So let's do snap to grid. That means as long as I'm in the area thereof. Let's get a run stitch here. Notice if I click here, I can click kind of between these, but it will actually snap to the closest intersection on the grid. This works really great when you're trying to draw really nice straight lines or diagonal lines that don't have a wave in them. If you snap to grid, see I can't make it off. It's going to grab the grid itself. So this is a really nice feature. The only thing that's bad about this feature is if and this is also show input controls, you're not just seeing the line, you're seeing where we saw also that it was showing us the measurement. It's also leaving our, when I right mouse click, this is already aligned, but it is showing me all my input nodes here. So that is really helpful when you're digitizing. But this will make you crazy, this snap to grid, if you forget that it's on and you're trying to do something that is a little bit wonky and it keeps snapping to grid. When that happens to you and you get crazy, just remember, oh, I must have had snap to grid. Now, this is a really cool one too. Okay, snap to guidelines, that's easy. Now here's a good one, snap to anchors. I love snap to anchors because if I'm trying to copy something, let me get a run stitch again. If I'm trying to draw, say, a square over a square, something like that, let's get a different color. If I'm telling it to snap to anchors, it's already going to snap to the anchors I have. I'm just getting close and it's finding them. Okay, I'm not right on them. See, I'm away from this one, but it will go ahead and snap to that anchor. See, so now you see the red on top of the ones I snapped to, but not on this part. So snap to anchor, if you're trying to do an outline of something that's a little off or round or whatever, you can snap it to the anchors that are already there because these are your anchors. So snap to anchors is a really nice feature as well. Well, we are not going to talk about any more preferences tonight. We will finish up with preferences next week. We'll do the rest. We'll look at digitizing. I hope you enjoyed tonight. I hope you learned some stuff about your preferences and about some functions we may have in Floriani that you hadn't noticed. So have a great night, and I look forward to seeing you next week.